So it isn't an exaggeration, in fact, to say that you have absolute power.
I have absolute power, maybe.
There can be no question of compromise.
But until a proper solution is found here, there can be no satisfactory form of government for Iran.
The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, ruled Iran for nearly 38 years. Throughout his reign, he'd kept a tight grip on power by ruthlessly suppressing his enemies. Communists, nationalists and anti-royalist opposition groups were all kept at bay by his all-seeing, all-knowing intelligence agency, Savak. But the Shah, along with his ally America, was slow to spot the forces that would prove to be his real undoing.
There can be no question of compromise in view of our opposition and the opposition of the people of Iran to the Shah.
Well, I think that we have always followed the teachings of Islam, not only because it's the law of the country, but personally, I am a believer myself.
The Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power in February 1979. It was the first religious revolution in modern history and the first televised revolution ever.
It's extraordinary how one man can command such adoration, how so many people can believe that this frail old priest holds all the answers to Iran's problems.
By the 70s, the Shah of Iran had become, to many of his subjects, a remote, autocratic figure living in unimaginable luxury. His parliament was now a mere rubber stamper of his commands. He had total control.
با گرفتاریایی که بود، با گروه‌های مخالفی که بود، با شوروی گروه‌های دیگه، شاید برای ایشون راه دیگری در اون موقع نبود و الان آدم فکر میکنه که اون موقعی که فضای باز سیاسی به وجود آمد متاسفانه بد موقعی بود.
یعنی تلویحاً قبول کرده بودن که خودشون خلاف قانون اساسی عمل میکنن، ولی به خاطر موقعیت اضطراری که ایران داشته.
بله، به دلیل خب گروه‌هایی که میخواستن اصلا تیشه به رژیم سیستم بزنن. خب ایشون معتقد بود که پادشاهی یه چیزی که برای ایران خوبه، برای یک پارچگی ایران و یه سمبل بالای همه احزاب.
Do you think that the absolute power which you hold in your country might be dangerous in someone else's hands?
Not if they keep the present institutions that I have set up, because personally I have 3 or 4 channels of inspection and learning the truth. If what I have today at my disposal is kept intact, they will be provided with all the instruments of checking and controlling.
But these channels all come back to you?
They come back to me, yes, as they should.
So it isn't an exaggeration, in fact, to say that you have absolute power inside Iran?
I have absolute power, maybe, because things have turned this way.
In January 1978, the Shah made what was probably the biggest mistake of his reign. On his orders, a newspaper article was published. It triggered an extraordinary response, with protests erupting in several cities in Iran. Thousands of people poured onto the streets, chanting the name of a 77-year-old cleric who'd been living in exile for almost 15 years.
The first time I actually heard the name of Imam Khomeini was on the streets of Tabriz. I want to say it was February of the year 1978, when I heard his name being shouted, "Long live Khomeini." I asked who it was. I was told something about his background. I think most older Iranians knew his name, but a lot of younger ones had not heard it, because I asked younger people and they literally did not know. And later on, as the revolution became hotter and hotter, and more people were getting involved in it, I would ask them when they had first heard the name Khomeini, and they would admit that I just heard it this year, a couple of months ago.
The article planted by the Shah's secret police, Savak, accused Ayatollah Khomeini of being a British agent. The charge backfired and turned a respected but relatively obscure cleric into a figurehead for all those who opposed the Shah.
آقای خمینی یک استراتژیست بی‌نظیر بود. اگه کسی میآمد با ایشون صحبت میکرد 90% باش مخالف بود 10% باش موافق بود میگفت تو که از خود ما هستی. خب این نگاه خیلی مهمه در برابر کسانی که اگر شما باشون در 95% موافقید در 5% مخالفید شما رو طرد میکنن مثل خیلی از گروه‌های سیاسی که همکنون هم هستن. خب آقای خمینی اینجوری نبود.
Ayatollah Khomeini had been living in the Iraqi town of Najaf since the Shah had expelled him. His sermons were smuggled back into Iran on cassette tapes, and a small but dedicated band of supporters would do their best to spread his words to the mosques. His office in the Iranian city of Qom was kept under close watch by Savak throughout his years in exile, but it was never closed down.
ارتباط با امام به وسیله نامه به وسیله افرادی که میرفتند و میآمدند و اینکه بیت امام را سر پا نگه داریم. یکی از وظایف انقلابیون و کسانی که در نهضت بودن چون رفتن منزل امام خیلی ساده نبود معمولا مشکل میتراشیدن افراد رو میگرفتن بازداشت میکردن اما بنابر این بود به هر قیمتی شده بیت رو زنده نگه دارن و لذا روحانیون می آمدن می رفتن بحث‌های مذهبی میکردن بحث‌های دینی میکردن چون بنا نبود اونجا بحث‌های سیاسی بشه. و مرحوم حجت الاسلام و المسلمین آقای احمد آقا رضوان الله تعالی علیه یا آیت الله احمد آقا بگیم اون هم در کنار این آقایون هدایت میکرد ارتباط مستقیم با امام داشت تا به نتیجه رسید.
Just why the normally ruthless Savak allowed the Ayatollah's network to operate under their nose is not clear. The Shah's secret police had already successfully contained an underground network of guerrilla movements. Other opponents of his regime, including communist and nationalist activists, were arrested, tortured, and sometimes executed. But in a deeply religious country like Iran, it appears Savak felt it had to tread carefully.
اون موقع محلات تهران هر کدوم یه جلسات خاص خودشون هم داشتن که حتی علنی هم بود یعنی حکومت هم کارش نمیتونست بکنه اما خودمون میدونستیم که باید به این جلسات بریم.
در قم وقتی شما میرفتید وقتی در عمق بازار قم میرفتید میخواستید تسبیح بخرید این در رو که میبست پشت در یعنی نه رو به خیابون پشت در عکس بزرگ آیت الله خمینی بود. بنابراین این ظاهر شده بود انگار که یه قطره‌ای میخواست که این قطره این سطل رو پر کنه یا بریزه یا حالت عمومی بهش بده. به تعبیر خود آقای خمینی که به دفعات گفته بود اینو به این عموم ما شنیدیم این که میگفتش که میوه برسه بیا تو خیابون. ایشون معمولا به گروه‌های چریکی اینا میگفت خودتون رو به کشتن ندیم وقتی وقتش شد میگم.
The publication of the anti-Khomeini article provided that moment. The army was called in to crush the protests. Dozens were killed. 40 days later, even bigger crowds came onto the street to demonstrate against the killings and declare their support for the Ayatollah. Stunned by the scale of the protest, the Shah refused to believe that Ayatollah Khomeini alone could prompt such a response. He suspected the hand of foreign governments, and in conversation with US diplomats, directly accused America of supporting his opponents.
And he came up with two theories. One was the Americans wanted to, again, as in earlier in the 20th century, wanted to divide Iran into spheres of influence with the Russians taking the north and the Americans taking the south with the oil. That was one theory. The other theory that operated in his mind was that the Americans were not sure that he would stand up to Soviet power the way that they would like. And they thought that maybe a religious-led government would be more adamantly anti-communist than he was, and therefore they planned to get rid of him. It was this, my reaction was, what kind of a nut is it that we are depending on to preserve our interests in this very important country?
Amid the turmoil, the Shah's inner circle noticed changes in his behavior and appearance. He was losing weight, and his actions were becoming more erratic. The Shah had been diagnosed with lymphatic cancer in 1974, but he chose not to tell those closest to him.